Unit 11 Power and Institutions. Contents 11.1 Introduction, 11.2 Instruments of Power, 11.3 Sources of Power, 11.4 Contexts of Power, 11.5 Conclusion, 11.6 Further Reading. Learning objectives. After reading this unit, you will be able to understand concept of power and related concept, the various institutions of power and its uses, instruments of power, sources of power and contexts of use of power. 11.1 Introduction. Social power is a universal phenomenon in human societies and social relationships. It is possessed by both individuals and social groups. It is in fact the basic common element in all social relationships, politics and economics. Social power is generally experienced in an unbalanced situations. These power imbalances are the root cause of most of the social problems. Power can be understood in two main ways. One way of understanding power that has gained prominence in recent academic discussion in the idea of power as a simple quantitative phenomenon. This type of conception of power pins at a kind of generalized capacity to act. The approach considers power as enhancing the capacities of those who possess it and thereby impinges to those persons who do not possess as an imposition on their freedom and liberty. The writings of Hobbes, Locke, inter alia on the discourse of power may be considered under this general approach. The other and more complex conception of power is that power which involves both capacity and a right to act, which derives from the consent of those over whose power is exercised. This approach looks at the effects of power as generally identified by reference to counterfactual conditions. In other words, the approach holds that power in the hands of others prevent its victims from doing what they otherwise would have attained, or even from thinking what they otherwise would have thought. Foucault's analysis of power is a good representative, Foucault et al. 1980, of this approach. This second conception of power is often implicit rather than explicit. The concept is central to much modern social and political thought today. Power has also been viewed in various ways. Some scholars, Mill 1959, would consider power as a zero-sum concept. Here, power is defined in a mutually exclusive manner. The concept could mean that if one person or party wins, the other necessarily loses. In other words, the approach conceives power as to be possessed by only one person or group in such a way that a second person or a group over whom power is wielded does not possess. There are others who opine that the power should be looked at as a kind of non-zero sum concepts. Parson 1961. According to them, each person or party shares power to the extent that both the parties' shareholders gains. In this approach, power is defined in terms of mutually inclusive objectives. Thus, social power is defined in different ways. However, for our purpose, we generally define power as the ability of an individual or a group to carry out its wishes or policies to control, manipulate, or influence the behavior of others, whether they wish to cooperate or not. Social power is also the capability to influence others or resist influence from others. The agent who possesses power has sources to force him or her will on others. People with great wealth, muscle, status, intelligence, competence, etc. have more chances to influence other people. Power has been invariably used as synonyms for the closely related concepts such as prestige, influence, eminence, competence, ability, knowledge, dominance, right, force, coercion, authority, among others. But they are not identical concepts per se. We shall therefore examine the differences of these terms. Let us first of all differentiate between the independent variables of power and prestige. The relationship of two terms may be understood in a way that power can occur without prestige, while prestige could not occur without power. For instance, a scientist would have a prestige but no power, whereas a policeman would have power but little prestige. In the same way, we could establish relationship between power and closely related terms such as competence, ability, knowledge, eminence, and so on. These concepts can be accompanied or may not be accompanied by power. The concept of power is very closely related to the concept of dominance. Basically, power is in essence a sociological concept, whereas dominance is a socio-psychological concept. In other words, power is located in groups and it's manifest in intergroup relations, whereas dominance is essentially located in the individual and it is expressed in interpersonal relationships. Again, power manifests in the status that people occupy in formal organization, whereas dominance appears in the roles people play in informal organization. Power is a function of organization, of association, of the arrangement of juxtaposition of groups, and of the structure of society itself. On the contrary, dominance is a function of personality or temperament. It is a personal trait. However, this distinction in terms of sociological and psychological discourses and also group wise personality need not be in a strict sense, because nowadays we often talk about collective dominance and hegemony and so on. So much so we also talk of power relations even in the interpersonal levels. Likewise, power and influence may be distinguished by an important features wise. Power is by and large coercive, whereas influence is persuasive. In this context, we could consider that Karl Marx, the philosopher, has a great influence exerted upon the 20th century, but he was not a powerful man. In almost the same manner, right like privilege is not power itself, but one of its prerequisites of power. But when we can pose the question as whether force and authority are power, the answer would be that they are not, even though they are very closely related terms. In a simplistic way, then we may distinguish them by mainly considering that power is a latent force. Force is manifest power, and authority is institutionalized power. Power is potential, so that when it is used, it becomes either force or authority. For example, the threat of a minority to withdraw from an association would effectively wield power, but once the minority group withdraws from the association, it is no longer power but force. 11.2 Instruments of power. There are three main institutions of or traits that accord the right to use of power. In other words, there are three instruments for wielding or enforcing of power. They are coercive or condign, compensatory, and conditioned power. These three instruments need not be strictly compartmentalized. They overlap each other at one point of time or another. We shall deal with them in brief before we get on to other aspects of power. Coercive or contained power wins acceptance by threatening, intimidating, and or inflicting on others with dire consequences. It includes power exercised by any form of adverse action or threat in the form of fines, resource or property expropriation, rebuke, and condemnation by any individuals or the society community concerned. The process of such power takes place in a situation where power is gained by attaining submission from others to abandon their preferences or desires through the capacity to impose an alternative to those preferences of the individual or group that are unpleasant or painful. We could understand coercive power in two levels. First, a situation where a person or a group who undergo very painful experience would still opt for the de facto condition as the alternative provided appear to be either no better or even worse than what they have been experiencing at a given point of time. Second, a situation where the individual or group withdraws from acting against certain composition or refrain from speaking his or her mind and adopts to submit to the view of others in order to avoid unpleasant implication. In other words, the person or group just accepts that dictate of others and would not speak up because of impending rebuke and harsh consequences that would come upon him or her or them. Box 11.1, Comparing and Containing of Compensatory Power. The most distinctive features of both contain and compensatory power is their objectivity or visibility. Those accepting the will of others are conscious of doing so. They are acting in consequences of a fairly deliberate calculation that is the better course of action. It has become so because of the offer of some specific quid pro quo for their submission. Those exercising the power are also purposefully aware of what they are doing. The difference between contain or compensatory power is the difference between negative and affirmative word. Contain power threatens the individual with something physically or emotionally painful enough so that he forgoes pursuit of his or own will or preferences in order to avoid it. Compensatory power offers the individual a reward or payment sufficiently advantageous or agreeable so that he or she forgoes pursuit of his own preferences to seek the reward instead. In less abstract language, contained powers wins submission by the promise of reality of punishment. Compensatory power wins submission of by promise or reality of benefit. The compensatory power attains submission from others by offering affirmative action in the form of rewards to the individual or group who submits to the coercion. In economic terms, the composition in rural areas could be in various forms, such as payments in kind of cash for the services rendered, the right to work a plot of land, or sharing the product of the landlord's field. In socio-economic and political sense, the affirmative rewards, be it economic package for development inter alia provided to certain communities or regions infested with socio-political unrest, could be another example of compensatory power in the modern situation. In the above two cases, vice coercive power and compensatory power, the individual or group is aware of his or her submission to the coercing agent through compulsion or persuasion and or inducement respectively. Reflection and action 11.1. How would you define power? Can you differentiate power from dominance, prestige, and influence? The third instrument of power, condition power, is contrast to the contain and compensatory power, which is visible and objective, is subjective. This is subjective. In this case, neither those exercising power or nor those who are subject to it need not necessarily be aware of its exertions. This kind of power is achieved by changing the attitude and belief of the individual or a group. In this situation, a person or a group accepts the will of another or others because they feel that the initiative taken seems to be right by way of persuasion, education, social commitment, or promises. They submit to the initiative because they feel that it is a preferred course of track. In such a situation, submission is not necessarily acknowledged. Condition power is in fact the most crucial and pervasive kind of power to the functioning of modern society, whether it to be in aspects of economy or polity, and in capitalistic and socialistic countries as well. 11.3. The sources of power. There are several sources of institutions or power. These sources of or institutions of power differentiate those who wield power on others from those who submit to them. Scholars have identified different sources of power according to their perceptions. For instance, Prestage identifies the three sources of power, namely numbers of power, social organization, and resources. He includes various components of third source of power, such as money, property, prestige, knowledge, competence, deceit, fraud, secrecy, and natural resources. Mann 1986 would definitely four sources of power, namely ideological, economic, military, and political relationships. Tumin 1992 opines that there are five sources of power, namely role, specific authority, goods and services, skills and abilities, personal qualities, and coercive power. Galbraith 1984 classifies three sources of power: personality, property and organization. There are also many other scholars who classify them in many different ways. Therefore, it is difficult to follow one single classifications of the source of power, but all of these classifications have more or less similar elements of the resources of the source of power. For our purpose, we shall consider the following main sources of power: personality, number of people, resources or property, skills, abilities, and knowledge, media, coercive force, and organization. Personality or leadership is the quality of physique, mind, speech, morality, competence, and other personal traits that enables the persons to have access to the instruments of power. The personality also means personal qualities such as beauty, charm, and charisma that persuade to persuade others to get others' favor. In modern times, personality has its prime association with conditioned power, that is, vice the ability to persuade or change the attitude and belief of others. Numbers of people is yet another important source of power. In other words, majorities constitute a residual locus of social power. Given the name, organization, and the same resource inter alia, the larger number can always control the smaller and obtain its compliance. We can see the number of games of power in various contexts. It is in simple societies, the access to the power was usually through the physical strength and coercion. Families with the large youths and muscular males would have an advantage of wielding powers on others. In other words, the muscular male youths in these families would be great source of power. This does not, however, mean that diplomacy and intelligence does not work in these societies. There are many instances where intelligent people wield powers in the same societies. In modern societies, we can also understand the number factor of power as seen in elections of all kinds, where the majority of is given the right to institutionalize its power as authority. This kind of power is observed in all association, be it democratic, autocratic, or otherwise. The power of a majority as found in both formal and informal association is beyond doubt the key to either threat or sustaining the ability of the association concerned. Skills and abilities is one source of power which enables people to provide services that others need or desire. These skills could be in terms of craft skills, military acumen, economic expertise, medical knowledge, and literacy artistry. It also includes knowledge and media power, among others. These skills give the possessors the advantages to have power over those who desire the benefit of their skills and expertise. Knowledge become power because it is an asset to comprehend circumstances, to predict and plan, and to create effects, especially by knowing how to use other forms of power. Media is in the modern world has become one of the great sources of power. Its contribution is most significantly manifested in influencing or contributing informations and communication by having access to the media and through controlling and manipulation. For example, the projections that the columnists make in the print media or television reports on important but controversial and important issues have great impacts on the readers and viewers. Resources or property is one of the important attributes to wield power. Resources may be of any kinds. It includes property, money, prestigious, knowledge, competence, skills, and abilities, deceit, fraud, secrecy, and all the things pertaining to natural and also supernatural resources. In the later case, by supernatural resources, we can understand of religious associations, which is an agencies of a celestial government, apply supernatural sanctions as an instrument of control. A wealthy person commands respect and authority in the process of its activities. A wealthy person can attain conditioned submission by submission or otherwise. The process of the possession of goods and services enable the possessors to purchase and acquire what they want. However, property, wealth, income, etc. is mainly associated with compensatory power. In coercive force, power is derived from coercion, be it psychological, or social, physical, and that one possess. Though this coercive force, the possessor of the force can threaten others to submission and carry out certain intentions and objectives. People, out of fear for fortune or any kind of punishment, physically, mentally, or otherwise, and be fear of the loss of their freedom and the resources yielded to the force, they thus become victims of coercion. These threats may be real or imaginary perception. Organization is said to be the most important source of power in modern societies, as well as organized and disciplined body of army or police can control a much large number of unorganized majority. In many instances, we also experience an organized minority control undergoes majority. This simply speaks healthy largely of the power of organization associated with all the three instruments of power, namely conditioned power, coercive power, and compensatory power. Reflections and action 11.2. What are these sources of power? Describe at least four sources. Role specific authority is almost an important concept of organization power by virtue of the authority sanctioned by the organization or position that one holds. For instance, the president of an organization has the power of authority of the office. Similarly, power is also possessed by judges, police, employees, teachers, and others in a formal relationship in which the partner has the legal or customary rights to command or control come or all aspects of relationship. This power may be seen within the limits of the formal relationship. It is specific to the status relationship one is associated. An organization usually has the ability to persuade others, provide installation of their objectives. Organization has also the access to coercive or contained power, like in the case of the state. The kind of access of organization to compensatory power would however depend on the quantity and value of the property it possesses. Box 11.2. Distinguishing legitimate and illegitimate sources and uses. Legitimate and acceptable powers must be distinguished from those that are deemed illegitimate and unacceptable. Yet all legitimate power rest on the same basis of as those which yield legitimate power. Gangsters, terrorists, prostitutes, gamblers, and others in the legitimate world are able to exert power because of their roles, specific authorities in that world, or because of their material resources, skill, personal qualities, and psychological and physical conveniences. Cohesiveness. Moreover, those who secure resources from the illegitimate world, that is, money from stealing, gambling, or drug peddling, can use such illegally acquired assets as a source of power in both the legitimate and illegitimate world. Money secured in the legitimate way, such as that of work, can be used for either legitimate or illegitimate ends, such as to purchase illegal drugs, or to gamble illegally, or to secure a position or contrast through the bribery. In other same vein, a person with the superior or role authority can use the power of his position, such as the ability to fire another person, to coerce the subordination illegally into desired forms of behavior. The sources of power would also have quite a number of combinations among and between them. They also include both legitimate and illegitimate sources of power, talcott persons. They are also combined in various strengths due to the coercive of combination. Varied result are also yield in for the enforcement of power. 11.4. Contexts of power. There are four main contexts where people can be exercised. There are four main contexts where power can be exercised. They may be seen in the context of political affairs, institutional patterning, ensuing life chances, and personal relations. To me, 1992. In the milieu of political affairs, it is essential to set the structure and mechanism of the affairs and conduct of political communities such as towns, cities, states, nations, and or international community. In this context, power has bearing with both the realm of individuals or groups. The groups would include association, political parties, whole communities, inter alia. Such collective derive power mainly from their positional roles. For instance, we have a situation where the federal government have more powers than the local governments as provided by the constitution of the respective state. In the context of the Indian state, the union government has greater powers than its federal states. Institutional patterning is also an important context of power appropriation. Power is relevant in the interplay of roles in the basic institutions such as the family, polity, the educational system, religious institution, and economy. In these institutions, we find some kind of relationship, be it between employees and employers, teachers and pupils, price and layman, and so on. Even in our everyday life, we all have some position and role in these basic institutions which govern our life. Because of our involvement in such relationships, we do experience different power in relations. The patterns of dominance and submission, which are important elements in determining pattern of conduct. In such patterning of institutions, role, especially authority, is a crucial component and role player. Power is also exercised in ensuring life chances in one's life. It operates in the competition for share of valued life chances. It could be in terms of chances for surviving the first year of life, maintaining good health, securing good opportunities for schooling and jobs, and living a reasonable long lifespan. These valued life chances are important factors to control one's destiny because they are contributory attributes for enhancing one's position and role and the ability to shape and control one's future. Reflections and Action 11.3 discuss the various contexts in which power is exercised. Personal relations outside the preview of the institutional roles are relevant to the appropriation of power. These relations could be of many forms and would take place at different situations. We meet people in the market, in stores, in the street, in buses, subways, trains, planes, parks, stadiums, seminars, and conferences. We do make friendship and love relationships at one time or the other. We also meet people in the neighborhood and other people who are not formally bound to us, but we know with whom we must network with for realizing our interests, desires, and movements. All these relationships are good examples where power plays important role in personal relations. We also have situations where people are attached and so want their friendships through one's personal charm and beauty. The same quality can influence other people in winning their love and confidence. These situations are some of the instances where power works through personal relations. All these powers discussed are not equally relevant, nor are they irrelevant at all situations, but one or more of these forms of power will be relevant in all the four contexts of power. Box number 11.3 Measurement of amount of power. The amount of power exercised by an individual may be measured either by the ratio of his successful power acts to all of his attempted power acts or by certain criteria. These measures may be used as a basis for comparison between different power holders. The two amount represent not alternative techniques of measurement but differences in what is measured. Amount in this case does not mean the same thing. Most investigations of power in so far as they deal with the amount of power utilize amount in the second sense. Two principal criteria may be used to measure the power of power exercised by a power holder. The number of actions of any given person in each of any number of selected types of behavior or which control is realized or potential, and the number of persons so controlled. The definition of dictatorship as a form of government where everything that is not forbidden is obligatory indicates complete power in terms of the spheres of behavior over which control is exercised. There is no there is no necessary relationship either of the amounts of power of an individual or a group in one context and their power in the others. A person may be very powerful in one context and may be powerless in the quite in other. For instance, a person may be powerful in the family, but he may be a subject to the will of everyone outside the family. Likewise, one may be powerful in national affairs and yet be relatively powerless in personal relationships. 11.5 Conclusion. Social power is a universal phenomenon that transcends all human societies. It is experienced in everyday social relationship in one way or another. Power may manifest as a generalized concept to act and or as an involving both capacity and a right to act. Generally, power may be understood as the ability of an individual or group to carry out its wishes or policies to control, manipulate or influence the behavior of others whereas they wish to cooperate or not. Social power is also the capability to influence others or resist influence from others. The concept of power is often considered as a synonyms to its closely related concepts such as dominance, prestige, influence, force, and so on, but they are not the same. There are three main instruments for enforcing power. They are coercive or contain, compensatory or conditioned power. These three instruments are, however, not strictly compartmentalized. Against, there are several sources of power such as personality, number of people, sources, resources or property, skills, ability and knowledge, media, conceive, coercive force and organization. Power is manifest in various contexts, be it political affairs, institutional patterning, ensuring life chances, or personal relations. The amount of power of an individual or group are not necessarily the same for different contexts. A person may be powerful in one context may be powerless in another. 11.6 Further reading from Michael Foucault. There is power, knowledge. There is from Max Weber, Essays in Sociology. Power, a Radical View. From Talcott Parsons on the concept of political power in sociological theory and modern society. And there are also given many reference books also that you can go through. Thank you very much. This is the end of unit 11.